Good morning, everyone. My name is Arpan Banerjee. I'm a doctoral fellow at Department of East Asian Studies, University of Delhi, and academic counselor at IGNOU. And I've been teaching you this paper, BPSC 132, Administrative Thinkers. So far in this paper, that is Administrative Thinkers, uh, we have learned about the Indian thinkers, which was the block one. And in that block, we learnt about Kautilya, who was our first thinker. We covered his Saptang theory, the seven organs of the state, and we did Kautilya's views on public administration. After that, we also discussed Mahatma Gandhiji, which was Unit 2 of Block 1, that is Indian thinkers. As part of that, we had discussed his concept of Sarvodaya and his theory of economic trusteeship. These are the two prominent things that we had discussed related to public administration. And we had also discussed when we were discussing Gandhiji about how Gandhiji's theory of economic trusteeship was further developed by Acharya Vinoba Bhave into the Bhudan movement. After that, we had done block 2, that is classical thinkers. And as part of that, the first thinker that we discussed in block 2 was Woodrow Wilson. And we discussed how he distinguished administration from political science. He distinguished administration from politics, and he said that administration is an autonomous field, it is a science. And further developing on Woodrow Wilson's work, the next thinker that we studied was Frederick Winslow Taylor and his thoughts of scientific management, which we did. Afterwards, we did Henry Fayol, his principles of administration we had done. We have also discussed Max Weber's thoughts on bureaucracy, Max Weber's theory on bureaucracy, and also on authority, traditional authority, charismatic authority, and rational legal authority, these three kinds of authorities that Max Weber prescribed. We have discussed that. We had discussed that when we were discussing block 2, and also we had done Max Weber's thoughts on bureaucracy as well. Afterwards, we had also done Mary Parker Follett and her thoughts on leadership and public administration, which we have discussed in detail. Moving on to the block 3, which we have also discussed about the behavioral and systems thinker. In that, we have discussed Elton Mayo, we have discussed Chester Bernard's thoughts on management, and also Herbert Simon's decision making and his concept of bounded rationality we had discussed. And in the last lecture, we were discussing block 4, that is socio-psychological thinkers. And as part of that, we have so far discussed 3 thinkers from this block. We have so far discussed 3 thinkers from this block. Abraham Maslow, we have discussed Abraham Maslow's theory of hierarchy, his hierarchy of needs, we have discussed. After that, we have also discussed Rensis Likkert's thoughts and the different types of leadership that he talks about. After Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have discussed Rensis Likkert's types of leadership in an organization. And finally, we had also discussed Friedrich Herzberg's. We had discussed Friedrich Herzberg's theory of motivation and hygiene motivation theory, which we had done in the last class of Friedrich Herzberg. So now, moving on, we are going to do the final thinker of this block, that is Chris Argyris. So we are going to do Chris Argyris today, who is the final thinker of this block, and overall he is the 14th thinker that we are going to discuss, the 14th thinker. of this paper. We have a total of 17 thinkers, and out of which we have already covered 13 thinkers, their thoughts on administration. And today we are going to begin with Chris Argyris, that is Unit 14 of Block 4, which is socio-psychological thinkers. So I've given you a brief overview of what we have done so far in this paper. So moving on to the thinker that we are going to begin our class with today, that is Chris Argyris, who is the 14th thinker that we are going to do, Unit 14 of Block 4, that is social psychological thinkers. So Chris Argyris, he's considered as one of the first generation contributors to the field of organizational development. So when we talk about organizational development, he's amongst the first contributors to this field, and he has been rightly called as one of the first generation contributors to the field of organizational development, Chris Argyris. And his research areas, the areas on which he conducted research, they were mostly related to the impact of formal organizational structures. He tried to analyze the impact of formal organizational structures, and also his research included control systems and management on individual. This was another field of his research, control systems and management on individual. He also did research on organizational change. And finally, the final aspect of his research was related to the role of a social scientist as a researcher. So the four things that were the prominent features of his research on which he conducted his research. First was the impact of formal organizational structures. Secondly, he conducted research on control systems and management on individual. He also did research on organizational change, and finally on the role of the social scientist as a researcher. So let us see some of his prominent works, some of the prominent works that he published, from which we get Chris Argyris' thoughts on administration. The first one was Knowledge for Action, a guide to overcoming barriers to organizational change. This was his first work that was published in 1933, Knowledge for Action, which was a guide to overcoming barriers to organizational change. So this book was related to the third area, the third aspect of his research, that is organizational change, and this was his earliest work, published in 1933. Moving on, his second most famous work is The Applicability of Organizational Sociology, published in 1972. So organizational sociology was also a very important theme of his works. He also did a lot of research on organizational sociology, the sociological aspects that exist within an organization. And his next work was Management and Organizational Development, published in 1971. So management, organizational development, organizational sociology, organizational change, these have been the prominent themes of the research work of Chris Argyris. Afterwards, he also did research on intervention theory and method, which was from a behavioral science view. So this was his next work, Intervention Theory and Method, a behavioral science view, in 1970. And he again worked on organization and innovation in the 1960s and personality on organization. So organization, studying the different aspects of an organization, the sociological aspect, the developmental aspect, the behavioral aspect, the relationship between organization and innovation, personality and organization, these have been the prominent themes of his research. So the first thing that we are going to discuss regarding Chris Argyris is his thoughts on the formal organization. So because his area of research is regarding the organization, so we're going to first start with his thoughts on the formal organization. So according to Chris Argyris, in a formal organization, the employees are provided minimal control over their work day. So it is not the employees who decide what they are going to do in their work day. In a formal organization, we are talking about. It is their superiors, those who have the decision making power, those who are at the managerial positions. They are the ones who call the shots, not the employees. So the workers, they do not have any participation, any say in the management or in industrial management. So in this kind of an organization, so this is contrary to what is enshrined in our constitution as well. If you see in our constitution, Article 43A, it prescribes that workers should have a share in the management of an industry. In industrial management, workers should also be given a share, which is a part of our directive principles as well. But in the formal organization, if you see, the employees, they are not provided with control over their work day. So their work day, which work they are going to do when, is not decided by them. Rather, it is decided by their superiors, and it is in a way superimposed upon them in a formal organization. This is what Chris Argyris says. Moving on, in a formal organization, the workers, they are expected to be passive, dependent, and subordinate. So the workers are not expected to be active and independent, right? They are supposed to be passive. They're expected to be passive. Whatever the superior authority, whatever comes from above, they are expected to just passively accept it, and to be dependent on their superiors for orders. So that is how they are expected to be subordinate to their superiors. The workers in this kind of an organization, they are also expected to have a short time perspective and not a long time perspective. So instead of having a long term perspective, the workers here in a formal organization, they are expected to have a short term, a perspective which is for a very short, brief period of time, not a long term perspective. And the employees here are of a increasing maturity as well in this kind of an organization. And another aspect of this formal organization that Chris Argyris talks about is individual and group adaptation. So in this aspect, in individual and group adaptation, the individual adapts to the impact of organization by their behaviors. So the individual has to adapt to the organization. He has no other choice. If he wants to stay in the organization, he has to adapt his behavior accordingly. He has to modify his behavior accordingly. And behaviors may be leaving the organization to grow or to becoming disinterested. So a worker may either leave the organization in this kind of a scenario where he has minimal control over his work day, where the worker is expected to be passive and dependent and subordinate, also to have a short-term perspective. In this kind of a scenario, and where he has to adapt his behavior also according to the needs of the organization, the worker has very few choices. He can either leave, he can either grow with the organization, or he can become disinterested, that is passive, and do whatever is assigned to him. Because he has no control. The workers has no control here over the decision making. So the next topic that we are going to do, the next idea of Chris Argyris regarding organization is his strategies for organizational development. So Chris Argyris, he articulated certain strategies for organizational development. The first of them was the maturity-immaturity theory. So the maturity-immaturity theory was the first strategy for organizational development that was propounded by Chris Argyris. So he says here that there is a basic conflict between the structure of a formal organization and the psychological needs of a mature individual. So there is a basic conflict, according to Chris Argyris, between the structure of a formal organization and the psychological needs of a mature individual. So this is the basic assumption of Chris Argyris's maturity theory, which is a part of his strategy for organizational development, that there is a conflict that exists between the structure of a formal organization and the psychological needs of a mature individual. Okay, so there is a conflict between these two. So further, moving on, Chris Argyris, he discusses the process of maturity that an individual goes through. So the first stage, the first step in this process of maturity, it is from infant passivity towards adult activity. So this is the first stage in the process of maturity, from infant passivity towards adult activity. So in this stage, from infant passivity towards adult activity, restrictions by the organization, it leads to the frustration of the employees. So when the organization places restrictions upon the employee, this causes frustration in the employee in the very first stage, that is from infant passivity towards adult activity. In the second stage of this process of maturity is from dependence towards independence. So this is the second stage of the process of maturity, from dependence towards independence. So here there is an interesting thing is observed, that there is increasing participation in decision making. The worker, he gets to participate in the decisions that are being made in the organization. So there is increasing participation in decision making in the second stage of the process of maturity. So in the first stage, which was from infant passivity to adult activity, there were restrictions that were placed on the worker and which led to the frustration in the worker. In the second stage, we observe, which is a part of the process of maturity, that there is a move from dependence towards independence, and the worker, he gets to participate increasingly in decision making. So these are the first two stages of the process of maturity, which is a part of the maturity-immaturity theory that we are doing, that was propounded by Chris Argyris as a part of his strategies for organizational development, which the fundamental assumption of which, as I told you, is that there is a basic conflict that exists between the structure of an organization, of a formal organization we are talking about, and the psychological needs of a mature individual. So because Chris Argyris, in this unit, we are studying about socio-psychological thinkers. So Chris Argyris, he also focuses on the psychological and behavioral aspects of an organization, like we read about the books that he wrote, Intervention Theory and Method, a Behavioral Science View. So he has studied the organization in detail, and here, as a part of his maturity-immaturity theory, he brings the psychological perspective of the organization. All right. So that is where he says that in his maturity-immaturity theory, he describes the process of maturity and the first two stages we have discussed, from infant passivity to adult activity, in which the restrictions that are placed by the organization on the worker, it leads to frustration among the worker. And in the second stage, we observe that there is a move from dependence on whom? Dependence on the managers, on the superiors. So there is a move from dependence towards independence that is observed in the workers. And the workers, they increasingly get to participate in the decision-making process. So their participation in the decision-making process, that gradually is increasing in this second stage. In the third stage of the process of maturity, the third stage is basically about uh, a movement from limited behaviors to much different behavior. So, although the worker is getting to participate in decision making, we observed in the second stage, but what happens in this stage, which is about from limited behavior to much different behavior, what happens here with the worker is that there is a loss of motivation because the worker is being denied, the employee or the worker is being denied a specific role. So that causes a loss of motivation. So the loss of motivation is caused by the denial of playing a specific role. It's not given a specific role. So that leads to loss of motivation in this third stage, that is from limited behavior to much different behavior. The fourth stage is from shallow interest to deeper interest. So, in the fourth stage, we see that the interest which was shallow in the beginning that develops gradually into a deeper interest. And in the fifth stage of maturity in the organization, the maturity of a worker in an organization, what we observe is there is an involvement of the employees from short-term perspective to long-term perspective. So in the initial stages, the employees were not at all involved in the decision making. They were not taking interest at all. They were disinterested in the organization, and whatever came from their superiors, they were just blindly doing that, not questioning at all, because they were nowhere near the decision making process. But as they get involved in the decision making process, we see that the employees, they relinquish their short term perspective and they gradually adopt a long term perspective. So this is the fifth stage of the maturity theory by Chris Argyris, that is involvement of employees from short term perspective to long term perspective. In the next stage, we see that the next stage is about from a subordinate social position to an equal social position. So the next stage is from where the worker or the employee who was earlier in a subordinate social position in the organization, he gets to an equal social position in the organization. So from a subordinate social position to an equal social position. This is the sixth stage of the maturity process that we are discussing. And in the final stage, which is the highest stage, which is the last stage of this process of maturity that Chris Argyris has described, there is observed that there is a movement from lack of self-awareness to self-awareness and self-control. So, beginning with from infant passivity towards adult passivity. So, in the beginning, there was a lot of frustration in the employee because of the restrictions that had been placed on him by the organization. We see that the employee gradually starts getting involved in the decision making as there is a shift from dependence towards independence. However, because the employee was not assigned any specific role, so we in the third stage we observe that there is a loss of motivation. So from limited behavior to much different behavior. And in the next stage, fourth stage, we observe that as the employee is getting involved in the decision making, there is a shift from shallow interest to deeper interest in the interest of the organization, basically. And afterwards, in the fifth stage, we observe that instead of having a short-term perspective, which the employees had in the beginning, they start adopting a long-term perspective. And then we observe that there is a movement from subordinate social position to equal social position. So there is an upward social mobility that is taking place in the sixth stage, from subordinate social position to equal social position. And finally, from lack of self-awareness to self-awareness and self-control. So the workers, they inculcate self-awareness and self-control in the final stage of this process of maturity. The next thing about which Chris Argyris has given his views is about improving interpersonal competence. So, interpersonal competence within an organization, how we can improve that is the next thing that Argyris has discussed. So, it refers to the ability to deal effectively with an environment that is populated by other human beings. So, interpersonal competence, it refers to the ability to deal effectively with an environment populated by other human beings. And improving the competence includes intellectual skills or mechanical skills. So these are the aspects of competence that are to be improved. So interpersonal competence, it refers to the ability to deal effectively with an environment populated by other human beings. And what are the components of interpersonal competence? Intellectual and mechanical skills. These are very important to have to enhance interpersonal competence. So Chris Argyris, based on his research, the extensive research that he conducted, which we have studied here, the works that he published on organizational change, he published on organizational sociology, organizational development, on behavioral aspect of organization, on the personality and organization innovation aspect of organization. So he did a detailed research in all these works that he has published. He can be called a pioneer of organizational theory. So based on his research, Argyris found that there was a negligence of interpersonal competence in an organization. There was a negligence of interpersonal competence. This is what Argyris found. And he then goes on to suggest 3 requirements for the development of interpersonal competence. So 3 requirements that he stipulates for which are necessary for the development of interpersonal competence. The first one is self-acceptance. So self-acceptance is the first requirement for the development of interpersonal competence. Now, what does self-acceptance refers to? It refers to the degree to which the person values himself in a positive fashion. So how much value a person accords to himself, how much value a person is according to himself, that is what is self-acceptance. The degree to which the person values himself in a positive fashion, not negative. How much positive worth a person is giving himself. That is self-acceptance, according to Chris Argyris. The second component of the second requirement for the development of interpersonal competence is confirmation. It involves reality testing of one's own image. So, the image that you have of yourself, you need to test it to the reality of the organization. So, reality testing of one's own image, that is competition, which is the second requirement of for the development of interpersonal competence. That is confirmation or reality testing of one's own image. The third one is, it refers to essentiality. The third requirement is essentiality. The first one was self-acceptance, second one was confirmation, and the third one is essentiality. Now, essentiality, it refers to one's opportunity to utilize the central abilities and express his central needs. So, how a person is getting, whether a person is getting opportunity or not to utilize his central abilities and also to express his central needs. That is very important in an organization. So a person in an organization, in order to enhance interpersonal competence, self-acceptance is very much important amongst the workers, amongst the employees. Self-acceptance should be there. confirmation should be there. The employees should test their own image with that of the organization. And also, the third aspect that is very important that should definitely exist is essentiality, which basically refers to one's opportunity to utilize the central abilities and express one's central needs. So these are the three requirements for development of interpersonal competence. So the new system that Chris Argyris has suggested for an organization. So he has suggested the organizational structure of the new system of organization that Chris Argyris stipulates. The structure one is pyramidal structure. In pyramidal structure is used in the performance of routine operations. So structure one of organizational structures of the new system that has been given by Chris Argyris. The first structure is pyramidal structure, which is used in the performance of routine operations. All right. The second structure that Argyris has suggested is the modified formal organization structure. Modified formal organizational structure. So this kind of a structure, it permits the subordinates' participation in decision made by the group. So the subordinate gets to participate in decision making in the second structure, which is modified formal organizational structure. In the third structure, there is power according to financial. So each employee has equal opportunity to be provided information, power and controls depending on his potential contribution to the problem. So as much contribution an employee is making, that is what determines how much information or how much opportunity and how much power and control is to be provided. It depends on how much he is contributing to the solution of the problem. And these were the first three structures. The final structure of a new system, the final organizational structure of a new system is called the matrix organization. The matrix organization. Now, this is one of the most important thoughts of Chris Argyris, the matrix organization. So here Chris Argyris says that each individual has equal power and responsibility. In the matrix organization, each individual has equal power and responsibility. Individuals, they are accorded unlimited opportunities also. So not only equal power and responsibility in a matrix. So in the first three types of organization, you see that the individual was getting to participate in the decision making performance. However, the amount of opportunity that he was to be provided, or the amount of information that was to be made available to him, and the amount of power and control that he was to get, it was all dependent on what he contributed to the solution of the problem of the organization. However, here in the matrix organization, we observe that each individual has equal power and responsibility. Each individual has equal power and responsibility. There are unlimited opportunities that are given to an individual or an individual employee, we must say. The employees are expected to eliminate superior subordinate relationship. The superior subordinate relationship gets eliminated in this kind of an organization, that is matrix organization, in which each individual has equal power and responsibility. Unlimited opportunities are made available, and the superior subordinate relationship is expected to get eliminated in this kind of an organization. And this kind of an organization is also characterized by individual self-discipline. So it's a very utopian kind of a system that Argyris has said. This is like the perfect organization. Okay. However, for this kind of an organization to exist, it's not a realistic thing. This is like a perfection that he has talked about, a utopian concept, the matrix organization. It cannot exist as it is in real life. So, in this organization, individual self discipline is very important. Freedom is accorded to individuals, and executive education, it focuses on system effectiveness. So, the education that is given to the executive, it focuses on system effectiveness. And this kind of an organization, that is matrix organization, it may have many teams also. So there may be a manufacturing team, there may be an engineering team, there may be a marketing, a finance team. So different kinds of teams may be there in this kind of a matrix organization. So this is the perfect kind of an organization that Argyris has suggested, in which each individual has power and responsibility. Unlimited opportunities are given to the employees, and the superior subordinate relationship is not there between the employees and the management. Everyone is equal. No one is superior, no one is subordinate. And there is individual self-discipline as well. That is a characteristic of this kind of an organization. And the individual workers or the employees, they are accorded full freedom and full participation in the decision making process as well. And the main focus of this kind of an organization, that is matrix organization, is to enhance system effectiveness, to make the organization more effective. So that is the main focus of Chris Argyris. That is why he gives this matrix organization theory. And there are many aspects of this kind of an organization. This, for example, manufacturing, engineering, marketing, and finance. So there are many teams who coordinate with each other. However, there is no superior subordinate relationship here. So these were the thoughts of Chris Argyris on administration. We did his thoughts on the formal organization and how he discusses the different strategies for organizational development, beginning with the maturity immaturity theory, which we have discussed, and also the stages of maturity, the 7 stages of maturity that he has suggested, followed by suggestions for improving interpersonal competence, the 3 requirements that Chris Argyris gave for the development, which are essential for the development of interpersonal competence, that is self-acceptance, confirmation, and essentiality. Finally, we also see the 4 types, the 4 structures of the new system of organization that Argyris wants to build. And the most desirable amongst them is the matrix organization, which he says is the perfect kind of an organization, which would enhance system effectiveness. So we are done with the block 4 of our paper, that is administrative thinkers. Moving on to the next block, that is block 5, which involves management and public policy thinkers. Here we are going to start with the first thinker, that is the 15th thinker of our paper, unit 15, that is Dwight Waldo. So after Chris Argyris, we are done with the socio-psychological thinkers who were part of the unit 4. Now we are going to discuss Dwight Waldo, unit 15. Now, Dwight Waldo was a very famous American philosopher, historian, and administrative theorist. He was born in Nebraska, which is a province in the United States of America, in 1913. And he did his master's from the University of Nebraska only in political science. Thereafter, he went to the Yale University to pursue his PhD. And that is where he wrote his most famous work, that is the Administrative State, which was basically his PhD dissertation. The Administrative State was his PhD dissertation, which he wrote in 1942. And after that, he worked with different institutions like the University of California, the Syracuse University, and also the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. So this was a brief biography of Dwight Waldo, who is the thinker that we are going to study. The first amongst the management and public policy thinkers. Three of them we are going to discuss. However, today we are going to discuss only Dwight Waldo. Now, his most famous work that we have just discussed, which was his dissertation of PhD, his most famous work is Administrative State. So, in this work, he says that he focuses on administration as a political approach. From a political approach, he views administration. And he says that, so instead of divorcing politics and administration, which was done by Woodrow Wilson, Dwight Waldo again brings politics to administration. So he adopts a political approach in viewing administration. And he says that politics and policy considerations cannot be excluded from administration. So politics and policy considerations are very much part of administration and they cannot be excluded. So Dwight Waldo goes on to reject the politics administration dichotomy that was given by Woodrow Wilson. When we had studied the first thinker of our paper, the second block, we had studied about Woodrow Wilson, right, and the principles of administration, which was his most famous paper, in which he gave the politics administration dichotomy. He said that politics and administration are different. Politics is different and administration is different. Administration is a science and not politics. Politics, it may be studied as a part of political science, but administration is autonomous. However, Dwight Waldo, he contradicts Woodrow Wilson. So Dwight Waldo says that politics and policy considerations cannot be excluded from administration. So he basically rejects the politics administration dichotomy. And he further says that cooperation between political and administrative domains should be encouraged. Rather than saying that politics and administration are separate, cooperation between political and administrative domains should be encouraged. And in this book, which he got published, it was originally his PhD dissertation, The Administrative State. We have just seen here when he did his PhD from the Yale University. He wrote this dissertation, that is the Administrative State. And here he contradicted Woodrow Wilson and he in a way rejected the politics administration dichotomy which had been accepted by his predecessors. And he said that cooperation between political and administrative domains should be encouraged rather than discouraged. And according to Dwight Waldo, public administration, it differs from private administration due to the political environment in which public administrator operates. So for Dwight Waldo, public administration and private administration are entirely different because the public administrator has to operate within a political environment. So that is why public administration and private administration are different. And Dwight Waldo also goes on to say in this work that facts cannot be separated from values. Facts and values, they are coterminous. Facts cannot be separated from values, and hence administration is both an art and a science, and perhaps more an art than a science. So we cannot say that administration is an art or administration is a science. Woodrow Wilson said that administration is a science. It has got nothing to do with politics. However, here we see that Dwight Waldo, he contradicts Woodrow Wilson and he says that administration is not only science, but it is an art also, an art of implementing. How you're going to administer, that is not only the scientific or technical aspect of it is important, rather how you're going to do it, the art of administration is also very important, according to Woodrow Wilson. So he believes that administration is more of an art than a science. So let us now focus on the four central ideas that Woodrow Wilson has propounded. The first idea is that there is an intrinsic tension between democracy and bureaucracy, and this tension obliges career public servants to protect democratic principles. So there is a conflict, there is a tension between democracy and bureaucracy, according to Dwight Waldo. And this tension that exists between democracy and bureaucracy, this is what obliges career public servants to protect democratic principles. If that tension were not there, they may not have protected democratic principles. They may have only engaged in self-aggrandizement and autocracy. But because this tension is there between democracy and bureaucracy, so this obliges the career public servants to protect democratic principles. So these thoughts are very much similar to Max Weber's thoughts as well, and also to Woodrow Wilson's thought, who said that the reason why administration in Europe was so well entrenched and so orderly, because in Europe there was no democracy. That is why the administrative apparatus was so well built. However, because America had democracy and there was a notion of constitutionalism that was prevalent there, so administration, it became a very tough job, because there were so many stakeholders involved that administration became very slow, and there was a lot of involvement, a lot of interference by the politicians in administration in America. So that is why Woodrow Wilson's famous statement is that it is getting harder to run a constitution than to frame one. So you can frame a constitution, but running it is much more harder. So again, the second central idea after the first idea, that there is an intrinsic tension between democracy and bureaucracy, and it is this tension that obliges the public servant to promote and protect democratic principles. The second central idea of Dwight Waldo is regarding the politics administration dichotomy, which was given by Woodrow Wilson. So Dwight Waldo, he says that this dichotomy is false. The politics administration dichotomy in itself, it does not exist. It is a false dichotomy. Politics cannot be separated from administration, and we cannot straitjacket politics, and we cannot just say that politics is science. No, politics is art as well. There is an artistic element involved. The art of administration, it depends from person to person. Okay, so that is why, and also because the bureaucrat, the political bureaucrat, the political administrator has to, the public administrator has to operate within a political environment. So if we say that there is a politics administration dichotomy, it would be a farce. In reality, this does not exist. The third thing that Woodrow Wilson, Dwight Waldo has said is that public servants must negotiate efficiencies that are demanded by the scientific management movement with due process and public access to government. So public servants, according to Dwight Waldo, they must negotiate the efficiencies that are demanded by scientific management movement. So the scientific management movement was started by Frederick Winslow Taylor. We have studied it. So by the time of Dwight Waldo, we are talking about the 1940s, this movement was very much prevalent in the United States of America and all across the world. And this led to a rapid increase in the demand for efficiency. So Dwight Waldo says that this demand must be negotiated the public servants, they must negotiate efficiency that is demanded by this scientific management movement with due process and public access to government. So not only increasing efficiency is required, but there should be a due process that is followed. It should not be unethical or immoral. And also public access to government, that should also be taken care of. So right to information, if you see in India, that has played a pivotal role, a very important role in providing public access to government. And Dwight Waldo also says that government cannot be run like a business. Government and business are different, and government, it cannot be run like a business between democracy and bureaucracy, and this tension obliges public servants to protect democratic principles. Secondly, we discussed what Dwight Waldo said, that politics and administration dichotomy is a farce. It does not exist. And the public servants, they have to negotiate with due process and public access to government. And finally, what I want to say is that government cannot be run like a business. Private and public administrative apparatus are different. Government cannot be run like a business. So something which Federal Taylor wanted the government to be run like business, which is basically a corporate states. But the government business are different, and the government not run like a business. Now, according to Dwight Waldo, so let us now discuss in brief his views on organizational theory. Let us discuss his views in brief. According to him, according to Dwight Waldo, organizational theory can be developed into three stages. The first stage is called the classical period. So the classical period basically is during the late 19th century, when Woodrow Wilson gave this concept of politics administration dichotomy, which has been negated by Dwight Waldo. In this period, it was based on this period of administration was based on machine model of organization, and it ended with the publication of the papers on the science of administration in the 1887. It was published. So this period was based on machine model of organization, and it ended with the publication of the papers on the science of administration. The second stage in the development of organizational theory was the neoclassical stage, and in this stage it began with the Hawthorne studies in 1920s. That was by Elton Mayo, and it continued till the mid-century. It focused on emotions and socio-psychological aspects of human behavior. The third stage of organizational theory was modern organizational theory. Now, this stage it began with the publication of Organization by March and Simon in 1958. And this modern organization theory, which is the third stage of organizational theory, it focused on organizational growth and survival. So, three stages are there in organizational theory, according to according to Dwight Waldo. The first was the classical period, which was the period of Woodrow Wilson only, where he published the papers on the science of administration. He talked about the politics administration dichotomy, and also this stage was based on the machine model of organization. The second stage was the neoclassical approach, which began with the Hawthorne studies in 1920s, and it continued till the mid-century. And it focused on socio-psychological aspect of human behavior and emotions. So we just now did Chris Argyris. So that was related to that. Also, Abraham Maslow was related to that, and Rensis Likert and Frederick Herzberg. The third stage of organizational theory was modern organization theory, which began with the publication of Organizations by March and Simon in 1958, and its focus was on organizational growth and survival. Uh, Now, Dwight Waldo, he is a critique of classical theory. So, because he has rejected the politics administration dichotomy, he was the first to do so. Because before that, Woodrow Wilson's stature was very huge. Woodrow Wilson was the former US president as well, and his politics administration dichotomy was pretty much widely accepted, universally accepted. However, Dwight Waldo was the first one to reject this theory of politics administration dichotomy, and so that is how he criticized the classical theory of administration. He said that the classical theory is based on commonalities, and the specificity of the organizations are ignored. Because it is based on commonality, the specificity of the organization is ignored here. All right. It only focuses on commonalities, ignoring the specificity. Every organization is specific. However, classical theory ignores the specificity of organizations. Classical approach also ignores the irrational and informal aspects of organization. So every organization has certain irrational and informal aspects. However, according to Dwight Waldo, classical theory focuses only on commonalities and chooses to ignore the irrational and informal aspects of an organization. So that is why he says that the principles that were propounded in this phase of the classical theory of administration, they are nothing more than common sense. They're extension of common sense. They have not propounded anything new. And in order to contradict Woodrow Wilson, Dwight Waldo says that values cannot be treated scientifically. Values cannot be treated scientifically. So that is why, because values are involved in administration, so that is why administration is not a science. And he also says that the efficiency of classical thinkers, it intends to replace the moralistic approach to public administration. So they are trying to replace morals by efficiency. This also is something that Dwight Waldo does not like, and he has criticized this aspect, that efficiency of classical thinkers, it intends to replace moralistic approach to public administration. So some of the things are there that we are going to do in the next class related to our thinker Dwight Waldo. We are going to do his views on comparative public administration and his views on new public administration as well. So we're going to end our class here with the criticism of the classical theory. We have discussed two thinkers, Chris Argyris and Dwight Waldo. In this class, in the next class, we are going to discuss Waldo's views on comparative public administration. So this is it from me today. Thank you so much. Namaste.